Good afternoon and welcome to today's Trust and Estates webinar, Planning Strategies for Fine Art and Collectibles. This webinar is brought to you by Fine Art Brokers, WOVO, and Pure Insurance. And I'll just tell you a little bit about our sponsors. WOVO is reimagining art storage and services. The company designs complete solutions for installation, transportation, shipping, and storage of fine art and collectibles. WOVO caters to every sector of the arts community, including artists, collectors, advisors, and institutions, and offers bespoke options to suit every budget. Pure Insurance is a member-owned property and casualty insurer dedicated to creating an exceptional experience for responsible, high-net-worth families. Pure provides customizable coverage for high-value homes, automobiles, jewelry, art, personal liability, watercraft, flood fraud, and cyber fraud. Today, Pure's membership includes more than 90,000 families from across the U.S. I'm Susan Lipp, Editor-in-Chief of Trust and Estates, and I'll be your moderator today. In a moment, I'll be turning things over to our speakers, but first, let me explain how you could get the most out of this event. To improve your viewing and listening experience, you can move your webcast windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize them by clicking on their lower right corner. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find multiple application widgets. These buttons allow you to open and close widgets on your screen. A copy of today's slides is available for download in the green Resource List widget. We welcome questions about our topic and will answer as many as we can following the presentation, but feel free to submit yours to the queue at any time. Just type it into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit the Submit button. This webcast has been accepted for 1 CE credit hour towards the AEP designation program, and the live broadcast of this event has also been approved for 1 CFP Board CE credit hour. Investments in Wealth Institute has accepted this program for 1 hour of CE credit towards the CIMA, CPWA, CIMC, and RMA certification. Instructions for credit submittal are available in the Resource List widget. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. Now let me introduce today's speakers. Ray Waterhouse is Chairman of Fine Art Brokers. Ray has been working in the international art trade for over 50 years after being awarded a first-class degree in art history and history at London University in 1973. Also, we have Bonnie Brennan, who is Deputy Chairman, Head of Trust, Estates, and Wealth Management at Christie's Americas. Bonnie joined Christie's in 2012 with 15 years of experience in the auction business. And joining Ray and Bonnie is Judd Grossman. Judd is the founder and managing partner of Grossman LLP. His clients include high net worth individuals, art galleries and advisors, businesses, and institutions. You can find more information about today's speakers by clicking on the speaker bio widget at the bottom of your screen. And the speakers have put together a short video to introduce themselves to you. So let's run that one now.
Hello, I'm Ray Waterhouse. I moved from London to New York in 2011, and I've concentrated on art advisory work for 25 years. With my colleagues in New York, London, and Paris, I help private clients buy art wisely and sell to their advantage. We also work with wealth managers and trustees on their own clients' art collections. My advice is practical and hands-on, a result of having bought and sold over 5,000 works of art. I look forward to your questions later and to communicating over the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
I'm Bonnie Brennan. I'm Deputy Chairman of Christie's, and I head up our business development efforts in the United States. That includes the important work that we do with trust and estates lawyers and wealth advisors. I've been in the auction business for 23 years, first at Sotheby's and now at Christie's, and I came to the auction world from the world of advertising and marketing. I'm delighted to be on the panel.
Good afternoon. My name is Judd Grossman, and I'm the founder and managing partner of a boutique litigation law firm in Manhattan specializing in art-related matters. Over the years, we've been involved in any number of high-profile litigations on behalf of artists, estates, foundations, collectors, and galleries, involving issues ranging from title and authenticity disputes to fraud and breach of contract claims. This breadth of experience enables us to better counsel our clients as they seek to preserve, manage, and enhance the value of their important art collections, especially in these difficult times.
Okay, let's start the webinar with a topic that's, I think, top of mind for everyone, COVID-19. So, Judd, why don't you start us off? What should art collectors keep in mind when purchasing from or consigning to a gallery under the unique financial circumstances created by COVID-19 and the related government restrictions?
Thank you. The only thing that is certain right now is that the future is uncertain. Galleries have closed temporarily, some even permanently, and many are facing serious financial hardships. Whether purchasing or consigning a work of art, one thing to be especially mindful of during these times is the timetable specified in the governing agreement in order to avoid potential legal headaches that could stem from a gallery declaring bankruptcy during the term of the agreement or otherwise experiencing financial hardship. If you're purchasing a work of art, it may be tempting, as it always has been, to give yourself the flexibility of a longer payment schedule so that you can pay over a longer period of time, or in some cases to secure additional financing. The unfortunate reality, however, is that many galleries may file bankruptcy, and keeping the payment schedule shortened may decrease the risk that the deal will be disrupted. The same principles apply if you're consigning artwork. You want to keep the consignment period shorter, in our opinion, in order to ensure that if the work does not sell, you are easily able to get your work back and avoid the risks of the difficulty of becoming a creditor of the gallery in the event the gallery files for bankruptcy. You may even want to maintain physical possession during the consignment period. It's not a standard practice, but in these exceptional times, it's a practice that ensures and maximizes protection over your property. If a gallery does declare bankruptcy, certain provisions of the Uniform Commercial Code that were designed to protect potential creditors of a gallery or other merchants can sometimes lead to multiple creditors competing to recover some of the gallery's assets. At the same time, the UCC provides protections for property owners, and by filing the appropriate UCC forms, an owner can fend off creditor risks. In one recent example that highlights the risks to owners and consigners of artwork when a gallery declares bankruptcy, in the last year or so, a Manhattan-based gallery, the Chouaki Gallery, declared bankruptcy amid reports of a massive fraud perpetrated by one of its owners. The resulting legal proceedings, both in the criminal context, the bankruptcy court, and the civil court, illustrates the interplay between bankruptcy law and the UCC. And it may come as a surprise to many. It certainly came as a surprise to many collectors and investors who we represent in those cases, that the trustee took the position that art that was in the gallery's possession or control at the time of the bankruptcy filing, either by consignment or otherwise, actually became part of the debtor's estate. Those who had filed a Form UCC-1 financing statement prior to the bankruptcy filing were protected and more easily recovered their property. But those who didn't, and there are many, have found themselves tied up in a legal circus for the last several years. So you've all heard the old adage, possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, in my opinion, at this time in particular, possession is critical to protecting property that you're buying or that you already own.
Okay, well, this next one is for Bonnie. What impact has the virus had on private sale activities, and how are you engaging with your clients during the stay-at-home order?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think it's no surprise that we, and I think across the industry, have seen a great surge in private sales. History has shown that in periods of economic uncertainty, we often see collectors opting for the control that a private sale can provide. That, of course, together with the delay of our normal spring auctions, has had a great impact on how many private sales have been conducted. There are a few interesting facts about those transactions. First is that they're really happening at every level, from as little as $5,000 to several transactions happening over the $40 million threshold. I think what's most interesting is we've seen great volume in the $5 million segment. Our Just Christie's transactions alone in this band are 4 times what we did last year. And these sales aren't just happening in the United States, they're happening globally throughout Europe, the Middle East, it's in Asia. And really what's changing, I think, about these private sales are the boundaries of before clients really felt they needed to see things in person. But technology has been a great partner to us, and I think all of the art industry at large has really had to move quickly to be responsive to the changing landscape, and we have all made great digital enhancements which have given our clients and collectors the confidence to go ahead and finish those transactions, whether it be digital viewing rooms or very rich content which educates them about the works of art, and engagement with our specialists to allow them to move forward. And of course, regardless of the channel, whether it be private sales or online sales, quality is still key, particularly in these uncertain times. Besides our private sale activity, and I know Ray will speak on this a little bit later, we also have seen great activity in our online sales. We've had to pivot and move a lot of our live auctions to online, and we've seen great demand. We've had activity and registrants from over 79 countries, and we've had over 1,600 buyers, not bidders, but actually buyers, 33% of which are new to Christie's, which I think is a terrific statistic. And of course, we're all so eager to get back to a world that more closely resembles the one we all left in March, and to have some version of a live auction. And we are looking forward to a very exciting sale that we're holding at Christie's on July 10th. It's called the One Sale. It's a global sale of 20th century art, and it really is kind of an international relay race. It will be in 4 different locations. We'll start in Hong Kong, then go to Paris, London, and New York. And it will allow for engagement from collectors in each of those regions. It will really be a combination of in-person engagement where possible, as well as accessibility through our online platform.
Okay, well, thank you.
That,
and now, Ray. Oh, good. Ray, do you think COVID-19 fears will drive most art business to online exhibitions and sales in the future?
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I think the answer for 2020 is certainly a qualified yes, because most art business will be online. There'll also be a pent-up demand from collectors and a need for sellers to find a way to transact. I agree with Bonnie that many clients are getting more comfortable dealing online, and for a few, even at high values. But we still have a way to go, because in 2019, online sales accounted for less than 10% of the $60 billion global art market. So for most clients, age plays a part. So let's say, for the sake of argument, above 40 years old, works of art need to be seen in person, less so for prints and works on paper. Auction houses and dealers will surely find special and safe arrangements for their A-star clients to view in person. But for the vast majority, online viewing is the only way for the most of this year. Coincidentally, a British journalist I know, Scott Rayburn, wrote a piece in the New York Times yesterday, and he noted the strong age divide regarding online sales. 29% of collectors under 35 years old actually prefer the online experience, compared to only 10% of those over 60. In this slide, I'm showing just the fairs that took place between March and June last year. Of the first two, other than the first two, all the rest were cancelled. So most collectors will be hesitant traveling to art fairs and mixing with crowds. And after all, what's the point of going to Miami, Basel, for example, if you can't network, you can't talk to dealers and other collectors, and can't party? So this is going to be a huge hit for the whole art market. A UBS survey estimated that collectors with at least $1 million in liquid assets last year attended on average 7 art fairs and about the same number of dealer exhibitions. So I think most of our listeners will agree there's an enormous difference between viewing online and viewing art in person, when you can connect with the art, perhaps take it off the wall, examine the back, talk to an advisor or auction house expert. The two images on the top show live viewing and the actual live auction, whereas the lower left image is the online equivalent. And there's obviously not much of a contest there. Bonnie said there have been great improvements in technology, and Sotheby's and Christie's online sales have increased up to 5-fold, but the overall revenue is a fraction of last year. For example, the aggregate revenue of $44 million from Christie's, Sotheby's, and Phillips online sales for April this year was 92% down on the live revenue from the same auction houses last year. Christie's contemporary art sales in May 2019 in New York alone totaled $630 million. Their online sale last month did well, but still only made 2.2. For galleries, my guess, unfortunately, is that up to 20% will close their retail spaces and deal privately and therefore online mainly, and perhaps 30% will close altogether. As online buying increases, I think certain issues will become more and more discussed along the lines of Judd discussed, but I'd like to say that images, which are the only thing you can see online, are not usually accurate. One can't oneself examine the condition, and sending funds for something valuable for something you haven't seen and to someone you haven't met is another big issue. So I think art shippers will do a lot of increased business in shipping works on approval and then perhaps handling the return of quite a percentage. Lastly, for the seller, there's also the question of exclusivity and privacy in things being online. I've often been offered our own paintings. So to conclude, a few top-end works will sell online, but a fraction of the usual numbers. The middle market is going to suffer hugely. And however inventive we all are with technology, nothing replaces the experience of viewing in person.
All right, now we're going to move on to collectors. So Bonnie, what does it mean to be a good collector?
Sure. Thanks, Susan. And I definitely agree with you, Ray, on viewing things in person. And of course, we all hope that even the sales that are upcoming that are online have some capacity to allow people to see things in person. There is no substitute. And in terms of being a good collector, I think some of the principles and best practices, they don't change over time. They are, in fact, timeless. But I think this crisis has actually highlighted some of them just a little bit more. The first, and these are really good principles for you as if you're listening, if you're a collector, or if you're an advisor and you're speaking to your clients about their collection, just a short list of questions. And the first is really around valuation. Has the collection been updated? And is everyone on the same page about what it's worth and what its value is? Purchase prices are not always consistent with where the market might be at a certain point for a particular type of work. And of course, the importance of keeping good records, the purchase invoices, but also if your client or you have made a loan of a work to an exhibition, keeping documentation around that is important, as well as any advice or input you've gotten from scholars around authenticity, if it's been included in any literature. All of these documents can be very beneficial when you're considering the disposition of the collection. And then, of course, now here we are in a time where collectors are spending more time at home. They're either together with their collections more, or sadly they might be separated from their collections because they have to shelter in place. And so making sure that work is stored in a climate-controlled environment. For fragile works, how are they protected? If we have a lot of clients who have multiple homes, some in warmer climates, are they protecting light-sensitive works, say works on paper? Are they protecting them under UV glass? If you know you have a particularly fragile work of art, have you had the condition of the work reviewed by a conservator? And are you doing that on a regular basis? And then, of course, if artwork does live in a place where you are not there to protect it, what is the condition of your security around that residence? And of course, is your insurance policy current and up to date with those factors? Those are all key points. I just want to spend one more minute on the importance of an appraisal. We deal with so many families and advisors making longer term plans around their estate plan. And oftentimes we have family members wanting to make specific gifts to children or to friends involving works of art that perhaps a family member has long admired. And this is a case study that maybe some of you have heard this exact case study or have heard of one similar, but a client that we knew in the auction business had two paintings, one Monet and one Corot. Her son had long admired the Monet. She wanted to make sure that at the time of her death, her son received that painting. And she decided when she was drafting her will to give the Corot to her daughter. At the time, the two paintings were worth relatively similar amounts. But of course, she drafted the will, she put it away. She didn't die for another 20 years. She didn't update the appraisal. And at the time of her death, the valuation for those two objects was quite different because the market for those two artists had really diverged in the woods, if you will. And this is not a representation on this slide of the works from this collector's collection, but they represent where the market has gone. You can see that the market for Monet is incredibly strong, whereas the market for Corot a little bit less so. So it's really, I think, a cautionary tale highlighting the importance of the appraisal process, of understanding the value of the collection, and planning properly around that.
Okay, Ray, how can an art broker help a collector or a wealth manager in managing their artwork?
So, of course, that's a very, very big question. And I find the extent and type of help a broker gives to a collector or wealth advisor depends on the collector himself or herself. Some like to view auctions and art fairs with their advisor, to have dinners and meet dealers and curators. Others prefer just to remain at home and let the advisor do all the looking and negotiating. I'm only going to discuss today three of the points at the top of the slide, and of course I'll be happy to discuss other aspects at a different time. This slide shows the extent an advisor can benefit a client. So in the first image, top left, I'm seen in 2012 at a museum in Alabama viewing a painting for my client in a private museum. And then I negotiated the purchase and had it reframed and hung in his home. I then arranged its loan to an important exhibition at the Met and the National Gallery in London. As a result of our frankly good buying and the donation, the loan, the value increased, and we were able to donate it with tax advantages at more than double the purchase price to a museum, which is shown in the bottom left, image 4. And I'm not joking, the client literally didn't leave his chair during this whole process. I also just want to say how an advisor can be proactive on behalf of his or her clients and take advantage of current market conditions. So with this Matisse, I'd advise on the acquisition in the year 2000 in London when the client wasn't able to see it himself. And when the market skyrocketed 7 years later, and particularly for Matisse, I really encouraged him to sell it. And we got a guarantee from Sotheby's in London, and it made 21.5. I want to talk very quickly about the importance of art market knowledge. And, you know, inside information in the art market is legal and very valuable. The illustration on the left, I'm sorry, is not very clear, but it shows the painting on the right, which was coming up at auction. And a company called ArtNet, an online platform, produced a pamphlet with two comparisons for that painting, both still lifes by Renoir, both of which had made more money. So it was trying to give comparative information so prospective buyers could judge the value to bid. In fact, we owned the painting on the right, and the comparisons were very flattering because our painting had a 4-inch wide added strip on the left, and nobody knew whether it was Renoir who added it or a restorer. Anyway, its value was compromised. So to make comparisons which look legitimate between paintings which are in perfect condition and one which has some doubts is dubious. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about how an art advisor can help with two very general aspects of tax. For anything specific, of course, I refer clients to a specialist, and we use Stephen Goldlit in New York, who's a specialist art accountant. As the opportunity for tax advantages during a collector's lifetime are now limited, as Section 1031 is no longer valid, capital gains and state and city taxes have to be paid on sales. But there are two aspects to bear in mind. The holding period impacts the tax rate. So for art held for more than a year, a long-term capital gain tax at a federal rate of 28% applies. If an artwork is sold within a year, it's taxed at ordinary income rates. And regarding sales tax, using free ports, such as one of our sponsor, Uovo's facility in Delaware, to receive and hold artworks can result in no sales tax being paid on acquisition. Back to you, Susan.
Okay. Judd, when a collector is building and planning for the future of an art collection, they may look to an art advisor for help. What are some of the legal considerations and potential pitfalls to keep in mind about that relationship?
Thank you, Susan. As Bonnie and Ray discussed at length, an art advisor can be a critical, indeed, and an invaluable resource in any purchase or sale, and I won't repeat the value add that those advisors offer. In the art litigation space, we have seen how those advisor relationships can turn very sour when people don't have a full and clear understanding of what the relationship is and what it isn't. The contours of these relationships are critical in defining the parties' legal rights and their obligations. For the benefit of the collector and the advisor alike, it's critical to document and to memorialize the nature of the relationship in writing at the outset of that relationship, which all too frequently is not done. Many sophisticated collectors buying and selling through dealers and gallerists misapprehend the role that these experts will play. Is there a fiduciary relationship where the advisor is held to a heightened degree of loyalty and trust? Or is this more of an arm's length relationship that does not entail those same obligations? It's important that that relationship be defined at the outset. And there's a fairly recent case that highlights what can go wrong in the absence of that agreement. Mega collector Ron Coleman and Larry Gagosian were involved in a lawsuit several years ago where Perlman claimed that Gagosian was his fiduciary, that he had trusted Gagosian's advice to help him buy works to flip at a profit. Turns out, according to Perlman, that Gagosian had any number of conflicts, though, including in the case of this Popeye work, that Gagosian also represented Coons, so that he had different interests in that deal, not to necessarily maximize Perlman's profits, but to protect his own interests and Coons as well. The dispute ultimately wound up in court, where Perlman asserted a number of claims, including claims for breach of fiduciary duty, pleading to the court that his long-standing personal and professional relationship, coupled with Gagosian's expertise, created a fiduciary relationship that Gagosian breached by not putting Perlman's interests ahead of the gallery's. Well, the court rejected that argument, and it dismissed those claims. Court held, and the appellate division affirmed, that Perlman's a sophisticated collector and that this was an arm's-length deal. We see other examples also involving the Gagosian gallery where the role of the advisor is critical to the disposition of the claims being asserted. These were two similar lawsuits, one filed by Steve Tannenbaum, the other by Joel Silver, against the Gagosian gallery, alleging that the gallery had breached its contract to sell Coons works by unreasonably delaying the delivery date. I think as many on this call know, many of Coons' works take some time to fabricate. And in these particular cases, it took longer than the collectors had wanted and perhaps contemplated. And they asserted breach of contract claims against the gallery. Notably, in the Silver case, in rejecting a substantial portion of the damages claim that Silver was asserting, the court noted that Silver is a sophisticated party and he was represented by an advisor in that deal, especially where such a sophisticated collector has that assistance at the outset. If they wanted to contract for a specific delivery date, they could have. As an interesting twist at the end of that case, it was actually revealed that Perlman was funding Silver's lawsuit, and once that information was revealed, the case quickly settled. I think the takeaway from these high-profile breakups is that it's vital to have a clear understanding at the outset of what your advisor will and will not do, and the extent to which they're working on your behalf versus working for their own benefit or perhaps for someone else's.
Okay, now we're going to move to the topic of communications, and this next question is going to be for all the panelists, starting with Bonnie. Why is it important for your client to communicate clearly with family and legal counsel about her wishes concerning her art collection, and what types of problems have you seen come up if that doesn't happen?
Sure. I think that the theme of this part of our discussion is really, to follow up on Judd, really about clear, transparent communication. And we find that those families who are able to have those transparent conversations with their families during their lifetime are set up for success. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of those discussions and what kind of questions one should ask or be prepared to talk about with their families, but then also the importance of having those same conversations with institutions if you are thinking about using your art to continue your philanthropic legacy. I think so much of the issues that we see stem from the fact that art collections are very personal, and planning for it can be so much more emotional. Family members, collectors have such a personal connection to their tangibles, much more so than their homes or their stock portfolios, obviously. And these are just some questions that we always encourage our clients to discussion points to have with their family. Does their family, do they even want to keep it? I think a lot of people assume that their children are going to want to continue the collecting that they've started, and in fact, oftentimes that's not the case. And if, in fact, the kids do want to collect, do they understand what comes along with it, the costs associated with maintaining, ensuring the upkeep of a collection? Are they prepared to do that? And then, do they really understand what it's worth? There's sometimes a big disconnect there. And then, obviously, larger families, there might be different points of view. So clearing the air. Someone might be very interested in keeping it, whereas another child might have different financial conditions and might want to go ahead with a sale. The other important point is if you have real commitment or connection to an institution, making sure that your family's aware of that so people's expectations are managed. And if you do want to consider sales, do you have preferences? Are you a very private person? Should this be a sale that your children do through private sale transactions, or do you really want a moment to celebrate the history of collecting from you or your family? I think of the best example that we've seen at Christie's of doing that advanced planning, having those conversations, is the Rockefeller story. The family was sat down, the family was clear about David and Peggy's goals. They absolutely were going to always donate their collection to support the philanthropic causes that they supported through their lives. And their daughter has gone on record saying that we knew the plan all along. We never expected to inherit the art. And as a result of that clear communication, we went on to sell the collection, support those charities, and it's now the record for any charitable sale ever held. As I mentioned, it's also, if you do have a philanthropic commitment, it is important to also have very honest conversations with the institutions. We sometimes hear clients say, oh, I'm going to give it to my college museum or the small museum that is in the town where we spend our summers. And oftentimes, those institutions aren't prepared to receive those gifts. You need to first ask, can they receive it? Is there an expectation of a cash gift alongside of it for the care and upkeep of that collection? And if they do want it, what are their plans? Do they have space to exhibit it? Is it likely to spend a lot of the year in storage? And of course, what kind of flexibility are you giving the institution if and when they need or change their mission or want to consider sales? We found that some institutions will only accept gifts when there are no stipulations put on the gift. We've seen a great trend, it's a wonderful trend in the auction business, with clients using their art to continue their philanthropic legacy, whether it's donating works of art directly to an institution or selling their works and donating those proceeds to charity. And these are just some visuals that express those examples, whether it be the Brody collection, the gift of the Matisse to LACMA, Stefan Edlis's wonderful pop art collection to the Chicago Art Institute, or Sedell Miller, who made a great contribution to the Cleveland Clinic, both directly but also with the sale of her collection. And that's, Susan, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. Ray, can you address the same question?
Sure. Just reiterating what Bonnie said, that in terms of realizing full value, it's very important that the collector, or in some cases the art advisor, keeps all original documentation and even conveys background information which only the original buyer might know. And backing up what Judd said, it is very important to have all contracts detailed in writing and agreed. And I use this beautiful Degas pastel as an example because about 20 years ago I was selling this on behalf of Marvin Davis, who sold 20th Century Fox to Rupert Murdoch. He and I agreed a sales price verbally. We corresponded on the phone and fax in those days, nearly every day. But in the end, that wasn't enough because after he went to hospital, sadly, I received an offer just 10% below our asking price, which I know he would have accepted. But my fault for not getting it in writing, as his wife correctly didn't feel comfortable in accepting the offer, and we lost the deal. But I just want to concentrate here on a couple of fiscal issues related to valuations, because in terms of tax, there's more flexibility in an estate situation rather than during the collector's life. It's absolutely important that appraisals are true and correct, but as there isn't a precise value to a work of art or a collection, and taking into account the $11.5 million limit, the executor and beneficiaries do have some flexibility and need to determine if a higher appraised value or a lower appraised value is beneficial. So if looking for a lower value for tax reasons, it's best not to sell within 2 years of death. And if looking for a higher valuation, then a sales price within 18 months of death can override the appraisal. Bonnie will know more about this than I do, but there can be problems for an appraiser or even a conflict for an auction if a probate valuation doesn't tie in with actual sale results. And remember that if an artwork is sold within 18 months of death, the IRS may require a revaluation of the asset in the estate, and if the later valuation is higher, then additional estate tax may be due. So in short, you need to plan around the timing of sales to support values. Back to you, Susan.
All right. Well, I'm just going to give Judd a chance to respond to that same question.
Yeah, and very briefly, Bonnie and Ray have outlined the best practices in estate planning. I'll just discuss very briefly a recent lawsuit that we handled, illustrating what can happen if those best practices aren't followed. And in that case, an artwork passed under a will that made no specific disposition of collateral, unlike the case Bonnie described earlier with the Monet and the Corot. Instead, the will said that the property, which included a Calder mobile, should be divided, quote, in equal shares to be distributed by the executor, who in this case was one of two siblings. Well, the brother, who was the executor, some years later, having had this work in his possession since his mother's death, brought it to our client, a Manhattan-based gallery, who purchased the work and some years later sold it to a European collector. A couple of years following that, the gallery gets a letter from the brother's sister saying, wait a minute, we were joint owners of this work. He had no right to sell it without my knowledge or consent, and we want the work back. And they sued my client in federal court, claiming that under the will, they were joint owners of the work. We ultimately prevailed in getting summary judgment in our client's favor and getting the lawsuit dismissed on the basis that the will provided no such thing, that equal shares wasn't the same thing as joint ownership, and that there was no evidence that there was anything providing that the sister was to be a co-owner. Perhaps that issue in that case could have been avoided with more specific and more clear instructions in that will.
Okay, moving on to art as an investment. Judd, I'm going to stay with you. From a legal perspective, why is building an art collection different than investing in other types of assets?
As one more senior member of the art law bar remarked to me once when I asked why art was not suitable for a particular estate plan, quote, art is just different. Well, that answer didn't satisfy me fully at the time, but there's no question that art is a unique type of asset and that the art market exists in a unique legal landscape. Compared to other types of investments that many on this call are quite familiar with, real estate, securities, all those transactions are governed by a special set of rules tailored to the particular type of asset and its unique quirks and challenges. Art transactions, in contrast, are generally governed by each state's own version of the Uniform Commercial Code, the same code that governs sales of any goods over $500, widgets, livestock, electronics. And in many cases, it provides for a very awkward application in the art world. With a piece of land, public records give you a lot of information about who owns it, who has owned it, who has a mortgage on it. With stock, you can look at public disclosures to get information about the asset. But art deals are generally not subject to these types of mandatory reporting requirements. And because of that, unfortunately, we see many in the art world, we represent many of these people, who don't treat art transactions with the same level of formality and extensive diligence that they would in their other business affairs. So while art may be different it's important to approach it no differently than you would with these other investments. As Bonnie and Ray have discussed at length earlier, work with an advisor. These are the experts, and make sure that your relationship with them is defined so you know that they're working for you. Do your diligence. Understand the market. Never take a seller's word for anything without the documentation supporting the title, the provenance, and the condition. Understand your asset physically is fragile. You'd be surprised at where some of our clients have stored their works. We have one client who stored millions of dollars of art in his bedroom closet. Probably not the best idea. And one thing that, in our experience, many collectors and galleries and dealers don't take advantage of to protect this important asset is this single one-page document you see on the right of the screen here, and that's a copy of a UCC Form 1 financing statement. What this accomplishes with the single form is putting the world on notice, whether it's a consignment agreement, whether it's a bailment agreement for an exhibition, that it's your property. It's not the gallery's property. It's not subject to claims by the gallery's creditors or the institution's creditors who are the institution exhibiting the work. It's yours. And once you file this form, you've put the world on notice. It's yours, and it's probably the most sure way to protect this very important asset.
Ray, what issues have you seen?
Well, an art broker can help in many aspects of selling a collection for an estate, and one of them is to facilitate private sales. But the issue of fair market value and fiduciary duty combined often encourages executors to give the whole collection to auction, as whatever is realized is considered fair market value. And that course of action certainly reduces the executor's workload and, quite honestly, can often be the best solution anyway. But I just want to say, while I understand the importance of fiduciary duty, that shouldn't preclude considering private sales. And I have one pertinent example illustrated here of a Cézanne that I'd help a collector buy in the late 90s, and after he passed away in 2013, I sold some important paintings from the collection privately at good prices. But after a few months of private sales, the trustee was worried about the issue of fiduciary duty and put the whole of the remainder of the collection into auction. But around the time of that decision, I was offered a good price of $8.5 million for this Cézanne in cash, but it was declined, and the painted ended up making $7 million at auction 2 months later. So I think it's not a conflict, but one needs to look at fair market value and fiduciary duty very carefully. Susan, the next question.
Okay. Yep, got it. So we're moving on to disposing of an art collection. So this next question is going to be for Bonnie and Ray, starting with Bonnie. What steps should an advisor take to help a client prepare a plan of action for the disposition of the client's collection?
Sure, and Ray, I think this is,
yeah.
Sure. Okay, we can start here.
I've switched to your slide.
Or do you want, okay. I think it's, to my earlier points about the collections being so personal, I think really understanding how engaged is a client with the collection and how specific do they really want to be. Some clients want to leave it completely up to their executors. Other collectors have really very specific ideas about what they want, and they're very clear in the documents about what should happen. And the best example that we've seen of somebody who had a very clear vision and outlined it very specifically was Robert Ellsworth. It's a picture of Mr. Ellsworth in his living room. He was referred to as the King of Ming. He was a passionate collector of Asian art and also a dealer. And his will, which is public, really specified exactly how he wanted the collection sold. He wanted it sold at auction, not through private sale. He wanted it to be sold with either Sotheby's or Christie's, and he wanted it to be sold without reserves or any guarantees. So it was a very easy process for his executors. They knew exactly what he wanted, and they were able to have that confidence as they made the choice. It was the choice of Sotheby's or Christie's was left up to the executors based on, the financials and the proposals. But I think it gave them confidence that their ultimate decisions were really driven by his preferences. He was equally clear in his gifts. He gave to the Nelson Atkins Museum, he gave to the British Museum, and in both cases gave very strict instructions about how he wanted the works displayed and what accompanying text should go with them. So, Ray, I know we're getting short on time, so I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah. So I'm not going to discuss all the points here, but I'm obviously very open to have answer questions at a later time. And I've already mentioned some of the fiscal preparations, but I just today want to stress the need to restrict, in some ways, the flow of information, because keeping a collection art market fresh, if possible, is important, obviously whilst balancing the need to present to some of the right people to effect a sale. And what I recommend is to get auction estimates from 1 or 2 or 3 houses, then discuss the estimates and what deal is offered with regard to vendor's commission from each house, and decide whether a private for sale for some pieces might obtain more value for the estate. If one does sell some pieces privately, then the auction house is going to be less favorable probably with their terms. But the benefits of a private sale might outweigh that concern, and in any case a discreet private offering shouldn't preclude a later auction if a private sale is not successful. So very quickly, we were asked to effect the sale of a $35 million collection that was taken as a bad debt by a hedge fund client, and it included Rothko and various Warhols. So I viewed the collection in a warehouse and then displayed it in our private gallery. So it was only visible to the auction houses we invited, and we did sell some privately, and Bonnie will be pleased to know we put the rest through Christie's.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to move on to another topic, which is fraud, art fraud. So, Judd, the newspapers cover sensational stories about art theft, art forgery, art fraud. How real are these risks, and how can a collector mitigate those risks in a given art purchase?
Thanks, Susan. In the words of one former New York State Supreme Court judge who presided over any number of important art-related cases, quote, "I've never seen an industry more ripe with fraud and misconduct than the art business. To say there's such a thing as artistic ethics is an oxymoron. Most of the cases I've had involving art dealers involve fraud outright, just plain old fraud. This is not a nice business." Perhaps at times that judge had a flair for hyperbole, but suffice it to say, it's important to understand that the risks are real. Fake art and stolen art is not just in the movies. As litigators who specialize in art law, we see disputes over title, authenticity, and fraud all the time. In the last 10 years, we've seen any number of scandals. The Knoedler forgery scandal is primary among them, where any number of very sophisticated collectors on a one-line invoice were purchasing tens of millions of dollars of art from this esteemed gallery that turned out to be outright forgeries that had been painted by a man in Queens. Following that, we had a case where we were involved representing collectors who had purchased Jasper John's works that his longtime studio assistant had stolen straight out of the studio and sold through a New York gallery. Those sales were accompanied by certifications from the studio assistant and from the gallerist, providing that these were gifts from the artist and that he had full authority to sell them, which of course he didn't. That studio assistant wound up in jail for his role in that scheme. And we've seen more complex frauds. I made reference to this gallerist earlier, but Ezra Chewacki, following the recipe, so to speak, that the Salander O'Reilly gallery used years before, perpetrated a complex fraud where in some instances he was selling multiple interests in the same works totaling greater than 100%. The math just doesn't add up. And more recently, in a similar fraud scandal that's broke, we have art dealer Inigo Philbrick, who the New York Times, GQ, ArtNet, and others have said is perhaps responsible for one of the biggest potential modern art scandals. He did many of the same things that Chewacki did and Salander O'Reilly before that. I'll give you just very briefly a sense of one of the cases we're handling there, where we represent a collector who was approached by Philbrick to purchase a 50% interest, with Philbrick purchasing the other 50% interest of a Basquiat painting. Philbrick showed our client the sale agreement with a purchase price of $18.4 million. My client wired the $9.2 million for his half share. Philbrick asked if he could loan another $3 million against Philbrick's half share. My client said, okay, wiring a total of over $12 million. Well, it turns out that purchase agreement was an absolute forgery. In fact, Philbrick was buying the work for just over $12 million, the same amount that my client had paid for it. To make matters worse, Philbrick then represented to an art lender that he owned the work outright, and he ended up taking a loan against that work, which is currently in the possession of that lender, spawning litigation. So what can collectors do to mitigate those risks and avoid these pitfalls? Well, sometimes nothing. The art world remains a secretive industry, so it's difficult to undertake the requisite due diligence that you otherwise would like to. But of course, as we've discussed at length today, and Bonnie and Ray have pointed out, advisors and the collectors themselves can undertake due diligence to the extent you can't do that pre-sale, where most claims that would govern these transactions are governed by a 4-year statute of limitations. Once you've acquired work, there's also things that you can do to verify title, provenance, authenticity that you weren't able to do before the sale. So you have the 4 years, but it's important to know that time's not on your side. As one Southern District judge observed, some in the art world desire a market that is neither open nor honest. Collectors in the seemingly refined bazaar should heed the admonition, caveat emptor, buyer beware.
All right, well, our last question for this webinar is for Ray. What other options does an executor have aside from placing the artwork up for auction?
Okay, thanks, Susan. I'll be very quick here. We've covered most of the aspects already. So an executor can discuss with an auction house the option of the auction house, offering pieces through their private sale side, as Bonnie said, which preserves a degree of confidentiality. But I noticed because of the current COVID situation that some private sales are published on auction houses' websites, so they're only private to some extent. Or an executor can negotiate directly with a dealer who specializes in the same area as the collection, or use a trusted advisor to explore all the options. And the Renoir I show here was part of an estate which I helped sell. I advised on the acquisition and sold it, some years later for 2.5 times the purchase price after the collector died. And I think now's the time for our long-suffering listeners to ask some questions.
Okay, let's start with a couple of questions. I understand that there have been issues in the authentication process due to the pandemic. Unless the work of art is already published in the artist's catalog, can you discuss that? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I have a specific.
You go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I have a specific situation at the moment where I'm contracted to an estate on the West Coast to help sell the collection, and because the works were purchased in the late 70s and early 80s, many of them, although they're big names, don't have the certificates that one would expect. They haven't been on the market for 30, 40 years. So we're going through the process of working with the foundations when they're up and running in getting those done. It will be easier because, good for him, the original buyer collected and kept every original invoice and letters from artists in some instances, so that's a big help. But it is a problem in delivering the works of art to the foundation because many of them need to see them in person. So how do you respond, Bonnie?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think, we've seen, obviously, the schedule of certain committees, like the Calder Foundation has a regularly scheduled meeting. We've had to be, very clear with our clients who have works that need to go before committees like the Calder Foundation that, the sale timing, unfortunately, will be impacted by the timing of these meetings. In some cases, we've seen some of the experts who previously have required to see works in person receiving photographs in the interim, and in some cases giving us approval based on those photographs. So it's frustrating. I think we're all trying to navigate our way through this, but in some cases I think it will be inevitable that sales will have to be delayed.
All right, next question. Have you seen an increase in sellers using their art as charitable vehicles?
We have. I think my slide sort of covered that, using it really to, particularly families using the sale of the art collection to further their parents' or family members' goals. We saw that with the Tisch family. That was on the earlier slide. I think it's a wonderful trend. We had actually recently this summer, I can show you a slide, we had a wonderful sale of guitars that were owned by David Gilmour, and they were sold to benefit charities that it was a personal collection of guitars that he owned. We expected it to make just a little bit over $1 million. We made that by the time we had sold the second object in the sale. So it was great to see these people wanting to use their personal or their tangibles to make charitable contributions.
Okay. Well, here, somebody asked, and Ray, I'll leave it up to you if you want to answer this one. How is Ray paid for his purchasing loan arranging for his clients?
Generally speaking, we take a commission of the price realized. So in a current case, we're paid by negotiating with the auction house, and we are able, because it's a valuable collection, to be paid part of the buyer's premium. So in other words, if a painting makes, let's say, $1 million hammer price, the buyer would pay an additional buyer's premium, which goes to the auction house. And so whilst everything is completely transparent, it has to be legally now, the auction house will pay between 2 and 2.5%, depending on the price realized. And if we sell anything privately, then we negotiate a different commission structure on sales. And generally, we pay all costs of shipping, photography, and transport. All administration is covered, and we take a commission when we perform.
All right. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm not going to be able to get to the rest of the questions here, but I am going to be sending all the questions to the speakers, and they will get back to you offline in their discretion. So again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Ray Waterhouse, Bonnie Brennan, and Judd Grossman, for an outstanding presentation. And I'd also like to thank Fine Art Brokers, Wovo, and Pure Insurance for making today's webinar possible. As a reminder, you'll receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you found this event useful, please share it with your colleagues. Once you leave the event, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We'd appreciate it if you would share your feedback on this event, as it helps us to provide you with content most interesting for you. On behalf of Trust and Estates, have a great day.